Migration. According to the United Nations, globally, Africa has the largest number of IDPs who outnumber refugees. Climate change has also led to a migration crisis, with people leaving their homes due to extreme weather occurrences, including droughts and floods. KTN's Fatia Mohamed Noor spoke to the newly elected Director General of International Organization for Migration, IOM, AMIPOP, of the migration crisis, in the continent.
Thank you, DG Amy Pope, for making time for us, and congratulations on being the first woman and the youngest DG of IOM.
It's my pleasure.
We are glad that you could join us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
The Horn of Africa and the Great Lakes region and the Sahel are marred by conflicts, with other wars in parts of the globe, of course, in the recent past, leading to mass displacements and migration. How does the International Organization for Migration plan to work with other countries in these conflict-ridden areas to address the root causes of these conflicts?
So when we look across the continent, we see right now millions of people who are on the move, right? Displaced because they can't stay home, whether it's conflict or climate impacts on top of conflict, so that the situation is more exacerbated. So our primary goal is to work at the root causes. What is driving the conflict? And are there ways that we as an organization can work either with government partners, community partners, members at the very local level to help address and identify what is fueling it? Now, it's not the same depending on where you are in this part of the world. So it really means that we need to be engaging at a very local level to understand and address what's fueling the conflict between parties. It's really a question of what their primary concerns are and building trust. We at IOM, most of our staff are from the local communities. We look to hire and bring in people who know the particular cultural sensitivities, who know the history, who know the politics. That's key, right? So we are not coming in from the outside to impose a solution. We're really sitting down, listening, engaging, and trying to drive solutions that are tailor-made for the individual communities who are at risk.
Then how can the International Organization for Migration collaborate with countries like Kenya to address the challenges posed by climate-induced migration and ensure the affected populations receive adequate support?
First, I have to acknowledge the tremendous leadership of your president. President Ruto's hosting of the Africa Climate Summit just a month ago was a real sign of leadership in taking on what will be a tremendous challenge in the region, frankly, in the continent and in the world. So it's terrific to see the work that he and the government here are really putting into coming up with comprehensive solutions. And the reasons to do so are felt quite acutely here. So, for example, I was just in Somalia yesterday, and in Somalia we have over 3.5 million people who've been displaced because of climate, because of drought. And then you layer on El Nino, and then you see quickly communities that are going to be displaced by flooding. So we see that in Somalia, we see it in Kenya, we see it in Ethiopia. So around the region, people, many of whom are extremely vulnerable already, are completely destabilized, deprived of their economic livelihood as a result of what's happening because of climate.
Now, the rise of technology has transformed the way migration is managed and monitored. However, of course, it raises concerns about data privacy and security, especially for vulnerable migrants. How does the International Organization for Migration strike a balance between utilizing technology for efficient migration management and protecting the privacy and safety of migrants, particularly in the regions where digital literacy levels are so low?
I see technology as a tool for more than just efficient management, right? That's one piece of it. But what we see through technology is the ability to unlock access for people who've historically not had access to markets, to banking, to doing business outside of their individual region. So that's key, right? So we want to use technology as a way to unlock economic potential, especially for people who are on the move, who may not be engaged in traditional business structures. At the same time, you're absolutely right. We need to be absolutely scrupulous about protecting the private information, the data about people who are on the move. And that includes, in particular, refugee populations and those whose disclosure of their identity would put them at risk. We take the issue very seriously within our organization. Like all organizations, we have to have multi-layers of security in order to do so. It's something that we know the bad guys are always testing, and so we have to keep evolving, and it's a place that all international organizations working with vulnerable communities work together to build more resilience.
Now, in many conflict zones, armed groups exploit migrants and refugees, using them for various purposes. What initiatives does the International Organization for Migration have in place to protect migrants and refugees from recruitment by the armed groups, and how does the organization collaborate with the local communities?
The bottom line is that people are most vulnerable to recruitment when the recruiters are offering them some stability, whether in the form of jobs or money or food or protection. So to counter the lure or the seduction of recruiters, it's critical that we work with communities to address those basic needs. And that means in particular focusing on young people. We see when young people don't have other options, when young people don't have job opportunities or schooling, they're the most vulnerable. And in particular, we are working on programs that target young people to enable them to develop their own skills and competencies, to better connect them to job opportunities, and to ensure that their better outcomes are working within their communities, working to promote communities as opposed to tear them down. So again, this involves really working at a community level and understanding what's playing out within a certain community. Sometimes we see xenophobia fueled because of lack of access to services. In some cases, we can work with governments to bolster that access. We have examples where IOM has improved access to healthcare for communities that have a large number of migrants who've come in. Or we work on solutions that the local community can have access to, as well as the migrant or refugee community. That's key. And then at the heart of it is facilitating the dialogue, facilitating the discussions, so that we find common ground. What I found, and I've seen this here in Kenya in particular, when you engage the local community in building out a solution, when you listen to their concerns, when you drive outcomes that include them as well as migrants, there's a lot more willingness to welcome migrants and to build communities in partnership with them.
And finally, being the first woman, of course, on this seat as the DG for IOM, women and children are mostly affected and impacted by climate change and hence end up migrating. What are you doing to address this challenge?
You're absolutely right, and we see it firsthand. I mean, I was in Dadaab about a month ago meeting with communities that had been displaced and refugee communities, and what we saw was a significant number of women with children who had been sent on without their partners, without their husbands, in order to seek shelter, while the husbands continued to try to make a living or earn some money for the family. So that means that the communities that we're supporting are some of the most vulnerable in the world, frankly. The solutions there start with a couple of things. Number one is really looking at how we empower the women themselves. Women are drivers of solutions. Women create stability within their own communities. They create options for young people. So recognizing that women are key to building a more stable outcome, we are increasingly engaging them, whether it's building livelihoods, whether it's ensuring that they have access to basic services, whether we are communicating with them so that issues of violence, for example, are quickly reported